Hello, welcome. You're listening to the Bitcoin Advocate podcast. I'm your host, Andy. And if you're new here, this is a show where we discuss all things Bitcoin on a weekly basis. This is the show that I wish I had when I first got into Bitcoin, which is why I started this podcast. This is your one-stop shop of complex topics in the wonderful world of Bitcoin, explained in simple ways. As a reminder, this show is available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and a bunch of other platforms. So wherever you might be listening from, if you like the show, be sure to follow and subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/thebtcadvocate. Last week, we covered Bretton Woods 1971 and the economic effect that is inflation caused by our fiat monetary system. This week, we're covering gold and the history of money. And I promise we'll get to discuss Bitcoin itself very soon. But as always, today's podcast begins with a thought experiment. Imagine that you're a government official in the Empire of Rome at the time of Emperor Trajan at the height of Rome's power in 117 CE. Your empire is vast, spanning from what is now modern-day Portugal in the west to the mouth of the Euphrates in the east, in what is now modern-day Iraq and Kuwait. Today, you're supposed to preside over a case involving a dispute between two men, Cassius and Flavius. Flavius claims that 10 years ago, Cassius has sold them the piece of land that he's been living on and farming for the past 10 years. Cassius claims that Flavius is lying and that he had merely leased them the land for 10 years, and now that the lease is finally due, Cassius has come to repossess the land that Flavius is refusing to vacate. This case is quite the messy ordeal. Both men claims that they had signed a contract 10 years ago, and if we could only locate it, we can see who is right. Except that there's only a small problem of finding that document. If the parchment had not degraded beyond legibility, it should be located somewhere in the Royal Library among hundreds of thousands of other documents. You sigh deeply. Microsoft Excel had not yet been invented, and neither has vitamin water. You know you're going to have to spend a really long time and less enjoyable time trying to locate that document. Before you can even send an unpaid intern to search for that document in the Royal Library, a courier arrives from the Royal Mint with a note. The troops need to be paid next week, but the Royal Treasury is running low on silver and gold. Both precious metals are needed to mint new coins, which the troops rely on as payment for their services. You know you have some cheaper metals lying around like iron and copper? If you were to mix those metals into the coins, you can make more coins with the same amount of gold and silver. You indulge in this fantasy for just a moment, but in the end, you conclude that it's a crazy plan. Diluting silver or gold content in coins is theft of wealth of the highest order and would subject you to severe punishment if caught. Surely no government official would ever think that this is a good idea. Not the ones today, nor the ones in the future, right? While thinking about what to do regarding the payment of troops, one of the commanders stationed in a conflict-ridden region of Germania requests that the royal treasury supply him with some additional gold coin on top of what he needs to pay his troops. He says that he had tried his hand at diplomacy for once with the Germans, but unfortunately, the Germans had refused to accept any verbal or paper promises and demanded to be paid in coins made from gold. The Royal Mint's coins, despite bearing the name and the portrait of the emperor, are accepted among pretty much all Germanic tribes in that region, even among those who are hostile to the empire. Clearly, this job is not easy, and you need a moment to think. If there was only a way to send money across vast distances almost instantaneously, perhaps using some type of ledger system that is also immutable so that it can't be manipulated after a transaction has occurred. Ideally, this money that exists on this ledger system can be used to keep track of all the transactions automatically and resolve disputes, like the one seen with Cassius and Flavius. But also at the same time, it could share a lot of the good qualities of gold, such as having a scarce supply and being non-sovereign, so that it can be used to pay people even if they don't recognize your government. It would also be nice if this currency were hard to counterfeit, as that had always been a persistent problem since you took office, despite you having imposed the death penalty on anyone caught counterfeiting coins. Lastly, unlike gold, it would be great if the ideal type of money were a little bit more divisible than gold. Gold is nice if you needed to pay someone for a month's worth of work, but it is difficult if you just wanted to buy a cup of wine for tonight's dinner. You ponder all these questions. However, nothing really quite fits all these requirements. You recall that it's 117 CE right now. Surely, you've asked for too much. This is just a made-up story, but what I was trying to illustrate in this story was the role of gold as money in our history. So if we really think about what money is on a fundamental level, it is an information system that conveys the message that I've concentrated my hard work here, which I've saved up. So for example, if you have a gold coin, you've delayed some consumption in the past and concentrated it in that coin. So when you use a coin to purchase something, that is you conveying the message that this is value that I've worked hard to save and I've delayed my consumption and instead concentrated that consumption, that value into this coin. And now I want to give it to you in exchange for some good or service that you're going to provide me. And the reason that we can trust this message is, you guessed it, the axiom of money. So for those of you who forgot, the axiom of money basically says you need to give up some tangible work or effort to acquire more money, or else that form of money becomes worthless. So for example, for gold, somebody had to dig it out of the ground, extract the gold, refine it, and cast it into a coin. And gold is scarce, so it's hard to find. And all of this requires a large amount of effort no matter who you are. So if you're a company or you're a government, you can have access to better equipment that helps you locate the gold and helps you extract it, but it still takes a lot of work to get the gold. This is why even if you're a German tribe in 117 AD who is oppressed by the Romans, you would still accept a gold coin from a Roman even though on the coin bears a portrait of your sworn enemy, because you don't care about whose portrait it is, you care about the gold. It doesn't matter whose portrait it is on the coin, gold is gold. So you can trust its value so long as you can ensure the purity of the coin itself. And this is the reason why today our fiat money carries a perverse form of this message. Because how can fiat money convey the message that I've worked hard to earn this money and delayed my consumption when the money can be created at will out of nothing? Further, it also requires trust in the issuing party of the fiat currency, which is a problem that gold doesn't have to deal with. So, for example, if you were selling your iPhone and somebody tries to pay with it using a foreign currency that you don't recognize, you probably wouldn't accept it. Because either you don't trust the government that issued the currency, or you're not sure how liberal that government is at printing new money, so you don't know the inflation rate, so you don't know if the currency would hold its value, or both, most likely both. So with fiat, the message went from I've saved up this value that I want to purchase goods and services with, to this thing that I'm holding that I want to purchase something from you with was created out of thin air and is only valuable provided that you trust the government that issued it. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, though. Let's circle back to gold and actually talk about why gold was chosen by humanity, why gold particularly was chosen by humanity for thousands of years to serve as money in society. So in order for a form of money to serve properly as money, it needs to fulfill 6 core properties. Now, I didn't just make this up myself. The 6 properties of money is a real thing that you can look up that was thought of by professional economists. So they are durability, portability, divisibility, homogeneity, scarcity, and acceptability. So don't worry if you didn't remember all of those. We'll go through them one by one and evaluate each property against gold and other forms of money. So the first property is durability. Durability describes a money's ability to resist degradation. And by degradation, I mostly mean physical degradation. So for instance, anything that is consumable would generally fare really poorly in this category. So if you store all your money in the form of fruits and vegetables, it will begin to rot after a while. So this is what I mean by degradation. So even for non-consumables, let's say you put your money in the form of iron bars, iron rusts after a while. So that would also not be a good example of durability. That would be a counterexample. So Gold fares very well in this category since it just so happens to be rather non reactive in terms of just the properties of the element itself. Gold does not rust or it doesn't tarnish. Even after 1,000 years, it still has its shine. So you want a form of money to be durable. On this note, though, our fiat money is not durable. So if it's in the form of paper bills, the paper can obviously degrade, but there's a bigger issue actually in terms of durability with fiat money. So fiat money, it doesn't even have to do with physical degradation, it has to do with inflation. Since the Federal Reserve was established in 1913, the US dollar has lost about 96% of its purchasing power. So gold beats fiat in this category. The second property is portability. So this one's relatively easy to understand. It's the ability for a form of money to be moved across time and space. So gold fares fairly poorly in this category because it's heavy. Fiat is much better in this sense since $10,000 in cash is much lighter and easily able to be carried with you than $10,000 worth of gold. Furthermore, fiat can also be moved electronically, in which case it takes up no space at all, and it doesn't weigh anything. The third property is divisibility. This describes how easily a form of money can be split into smaller denominations for smaller purchases. So gold also fares fairly poorly in this category, since if you're trying to buy something with gold, if you're trying to buy something small with gold like a coffee, it's going to be really hard for you to get $2 worth of gold since it'll just be tiny microscopic flakes of gold. Fiat is obviously much better in this category since the smallest unit is a cent and there's almost no scenario where you need something smaller than that these days. The fourth property is homogeneity, and some people also call this uniformity. And this property describes the fungibility of an asset. So fungibility means the ability for one unit of currency to be exchanged for another unit with all else being equal and you're indifferent to the two. So it's a little bit of a complicated definition, so let me explain that in more detail. So for example, fiat excels in fungibility because a $100 bill is the same as another $100 bill, provided that they're both the same currency, right? So pretend that I'm talking about US dollars, right? So a 100 US dollar bill is the same as any other 100 US dollar bill. So they're interchangeable. And if I do change them up, you'd be indifferent as to which two. So you might prefer the cleaner, crisper bill, but value-wise, there's no difference. If you're a merchant and you're trying to accept a $100 payment from somebody, it doesn't really matter if you get a cleaner or crisper bill, you get the same value. So whether you get an older or newer bill, you just as happily accept either. And the reason why we want uniformity is so that we don't want to have to look at the money itself and ensure that we're getting what we think we're getting whenever we sell something or get paid. So gold can be made to be rather uniform by casting it into a coin. So for example, one of the most famous coins is the 1 ounce United States gold buffalo. And if you cast it into gold buffaloes, one gold buffalo should be worth the same as another gold buffalo, right? So, it doesn't absolutely suck in this category. However, it's definitely not as good as fiat because you don't have to cast it into a United States gold buffalo, right? In fact, if you're from a different country, if you're from, let's say, Canada, Canada has their gold maple leaf, which is a different coin, right? So, there might be some difference between a gold maple leaf, than a gold buffalo, even though they're both 1 ounce. Gold can be made to be rather fungible, but it's not going to be 100%. And you also have to trust the mint that it came from, who can vouch for its purity. Next, on to the fifth property. We want a form of money to be scarce. The reason why gold is worth more than iron, let's say, is because iron is much more abundant. However, this one is tricky because you also don't want the form of money to be too scarce, because if it's too scarce, that will affect its divisibility. So for example, platinum is a little bit too scarce to be used as money. So if we use platinum as money, there's not enough of it to go around for everyone in the world to get even a small piece, and that would make making small purchases a nightmare. However, on the other end of the spectrum, you also don't want it to be not scarce at all. So fiat money that we use right now is quite the opposite of scarce, considering that the US M2 money supply has exploded upwards in the wake of the stimulus policies implemented as a result of the COVID pandemic. And even before the COVID pandemic, the US dollar has been printed to stimulate the economy for decades. So if you look at the M2 money supply, which is a measure of how much money is in circulation, how much US dollars is in circulation, I should say, it's been going upwards and there's no signs of slowing down. Actually, I'm picking on the US dollar, but there's other fiat currencies that are much worse. We won't talk about every single one of them, but yeah, basically, fiat money is not scarce, is what I'm trying to say. So gold definitely beats fiat in the scarcity category. And I think gold strikes the sweet spot in terms of being the right amount of scarce. So it's not as scarce as platinum, like I just said, but it's definitely a lot scarcer than fiat money. And lastly, we have acceptability as a sixth property. So this property describes the form of money's ability to be accepted worldwide. Traditionally, gold has also excelled in this area. So if you're a British merchant and you wanted to trade with India, and let's say this is the first time these two cultures have made contact, most likely the Indians would find gold just as valuable as you do, despite the cultural difference and the language barrier. However, in modern times, the acceptability of gold worldwide has been surpassed by the US dollar. The US dollar is now the most widely accepted form of money around the world. However, I think that gold is still up there in terms of acceptability, all things considered. So let's summarize what we just talked about, though. So we see out of the six properties of money, gold excels in durability and scarcity, while fiat excels in divisibility, portability, homogeneity, and acceptability. So it's easy to come to the conclusion that fiat is better than gold because fiat seemingly excels in more of the six properties. However, I would hold your horses on that for just a second there. So that is the conclusion, assuming that all properties are worth the same, which is not necessarily the case. So for example, why would maybe someone would prefer gold due to its durability and willing to accept the fact that it maybe is not as divisible as fiat. So just because a form of money excels in more categories doesn't mean that it's better unless it really is better across the board on all six properties. And for its flaws, when fiat fails at a particular property, it really fails. As in, when I say that fiat is not scarce, it is indeed very not scarce. And when I say that fiat is not durable, it is really prone to inflation over long periods of time. So we got to think about the problem in kind of an overall macro sense. And I think that you'll find it once you look in the macro sense that gold is still one of the best forms of money overall across these six categories, all things considered. And this is evident by the fact that humans have used gold for thousands of years as money. But with that being said, can we do even better than gold? And if you ask me, the answer is yes. And I'll give you a hint as to what my answer is. It starts with a B. But we'll talk about that next episode. So I'll leave the episode here. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you.